everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Behnam, thank you so much for coming on once again.
Pleasure. Thank you. Great to be with you.
The world was watching America this week as we all voted in the presidential election. And in a historic reversal, Donald Trump will be back in the White House after his 2020 loss. So what do you think this win means both for our allies and our adversaries abroad?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. In so many ways, this is kind of like 1968, where you heard the slogan, "The whole world is watching." Both allies and adversaries sense threats and opportunities based on their experience with the first-term Trump administration from 2017 to 2021. However, this go-around, the world hasn't been paused since 2021. The whole host of threats that we face from our adversaries, be it in the Middle East, be it in Europe or Eurasia, be it in other parts of the world that are non-state actor-based, all of those have actually intensified. Meanwhile, our allies need more of our support, more of our political, military, and economic reassurance than ever before. So how Trump and his new national security team steer the ship come this 2025 will be key to, again, meeting the expectations and exceeding the expectations of our allies and being able to at least roll back, contain, and potentially even defeat some of our adversaries.
We're in a really interesting time right now because we saw 4 years under Trump, 2017 to the beginning of 2021. We then had 4 years of Biden. We will be back with 4 years with Trump. So when you're looking at Trump's first term, are you looking at anything as an indicator of how America will look on the world stage with Trump as our leader?
I think despite a lot of the national security and political changes and reshuffling, there are some very strong through lines in terms of the Trump administration's first term foreign and security policy that could be easily transposed to, and if I had to bet, would be transposed to a second term. One of them is peace through strength. The ability to actually, push back and not be afraid to use force when necessary against our adversaries. The killing of Qasem Soleimani, Iran's chief terrorist in 2020, caused a geopolitical earthquake, not just with respect to the Islamic Republic, but across the Middle East. But also to not be afraid to push the boundaries with some of our allies and raise some of the uncomfortable issues like NATO defense spending. Those are through lines that I expect to continue, meaning finding ways to put more pressure on our adversaries and finding ways to make sure that American allies do their fair share and carry their fair share. This is, I think, likely to pick up exactly where it left off in 2025.
It's interesting because Donald Trump said NATO wasn't doing their fair share during his first term. So now in a Trump second term, what does that alliance look like? If you're a NATO country, what are you thinking right now?
I think every country, not just a NATO country, but every country that has good and productive relations with the United States based on mutual interest. And number one, I would say mutual interest is imperative here to build a better political and economic and military relationship with the United States. This has always been true. But based on that mutual interest, they're going to have to find ways to either come to a consensus on what to do, whether that's the political orientation of their country, whether that's things like border control, whether that's things like dealing with transnational threats, or when they can't agree, they're going to have to learn how to horse trade, how to rank value what they prioritize, whether that's what Washington prioritizes or whether that's what some of our partners will prioritize.
Donald Trump has campaigned on this America First mentality. Does this sour our relationships with our allies? Does this make America more isolationist over the next 4 years? What do you think that looks like?
Although I would say there is elements within the new right or the ascendant right that are isolationist in some of their views on foreign policy and security policy and don't read the chain of causality right as to how we got to some of the crises that we now face today abroad. Ultimately, any policy that puts the national interest of the country that's enacting that policy first is the right policy. And this is the right policy to be able to have a more honest and holistic foreign and security policy with respect to our allies, but also to be able to really push back on the threats that our adversaries pose. So there's nothing wrong with America first in principle. What can go wrong is how the rubber hits the road in practice. And that's where everything from hand-holding to arm twisting to good old-fashioned diplomacy is going to be key to making sure that we all march together based on that mutual interest.
Is Donald Trump good at threading the needle between hand holding and arm twisting and everything in between? What does that look like? Is his leadership on the national or on the international stage more of a bull in a china shop? What's that look like?
Well, there's some things that Trump supporters appreciate about the former president, at least in the first term, being a bull in the china shop, slaughtering some of the sacred cows, challenging and pushing back on the conventional wisdom. It's a mixed track record based on the area that you're looking at. I would say it's not a wise decision to go near the territory of an adversary and denigrate your own intelligence agency. Conversely, I would say, however, some of the sacred cows he slaughtered on an issue of great concern to me, American policy towards Iran, were actually productive, meaning the breaking of the taboo that used to hold Washington, D.C. hostage simply by pushing through, simply by testing the boundaries. And that taboo was that you can't politically support the Iranian people when they're out into the street. Many had said for a little over a decade and a half, 2 decades in Washington, that that would be akin to a kiss of death. But actually, Donald Trump has been quite popular inside Iran with the people, and they've identified really with his policies of putting pressure on the regime and really being like a bull in a china shop and breaking a lot of the conventional wisdom that, in their view and respectfully in my view, has handicapped American policy towards Iran.
In the Middle East, there's been conflict now for over a year. Israel has been fighting a multi-front war with Hezbollah in the north, with Hamas in Gaza. Donald Trump said if he was president, there would be peace in the Middle East. What do you think the war in the Middle East looks like under a Trump presidency?
Well, it's interesting to note, well, with respect to the Middle East here, that there was no iteration as far as we could tell, of the Israel-Hamas war or the Israel-Gaza wars under the Trump administration, just like there was no Russian invasion of its neighbors under the Trump administration, especially when you look at the track record of Crimea in 2014 and Georgia many years earlier in the late part of the Bush administration. So whether we like it or not, a lot of the signaling, a lot of the style from the Trump administration in term one had, at least based on the impact on our adversaries, a substance of its own, a deterrent substance of its own. And that's why when the president-elect says if he was in charge, the conflict would not have happened or things would not have spiraled out of control. Yes, there's quite a bit of hyperbole there, but the track record indicates that threat was effective.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement after Donald Trump was elected, and he called the victory history's greatest comeback, and he wrote this: "Your historic return to the White House offers a new beginning for America and a powerful recommitment to the great alliance between Israel and America." In a Trump presidency, what does Israel and America's relationship look like, and what does that mean for, will there be a negotiation, a ceasefire negotiation? Will this war wrap up? What does that look like?
Well, it's too soon to tell what that looks like because both America and Israel have to be taking their cues from the street. What is happening across the Arab world, what is happening in terms of the military battles the Israeli have against the various Iran-backed proxies throughout the region, as well as what does the time 2, 3, 4 impact of the Trump administration's policy towards the patron of these proxies, towards Tehran, look like. But ultimately, the sky's the limit for where the U.S.-Israel relationship can and indeed should go. Israel is a key national security partner of the United States. They share the same threats. They share a very similar understanding of counterterrorism in the region, counterproliferation in the region. And again, the sky is the limit to building a better, more cohesive, more productive Middle Eastern order. And you simply can't have that with the arsonist of the region, the Islamic Republic of Iran, trying to bait and bleed Israel into multiple rounds of conflict using the Arab street against Israel.
And you mentioned Iran. If you're Iran because you are backing Hezbollah, you're backing Hamas, what are you thinking right now, seeing that Donald Trump just won?
Well, there is very much a fear, and this fear existed months ago before we even had an inkling as to the changes in the Democratic Party ticket, But there was a fear that Iran might use the period of time between the election and the inauguration, the lame duck period, to be able to increase its atomic infrastructure and to move forward towards weaponization, and also to be able to present a fait accompli to the incoming administration, no matter who that may be. Ironically enough, Israel's military successes based on going after Iran's conventional deterrent architecture, meaning devaluing those missiles through interception and gutting much of the infrastructure surrounding Hamas's capabilities to the south and Hezbollah's capabilities to the north, basically appear to have cemented the logic in Tehran to go for the nuclear option. And given that the Trump administration in term one had a policy of maximum pressure against the Islamic Republic, Tehran might be considering right now both to push back on Israel in the region, as well as to build leverage against a potential Trump term two pressure policy. It would need to increase its nuclear leverage. And that's the real fear here. Meaning, before we even get to a Trump administration, the Biden administration needs to do what is right by American deterrence, bolster our policy, our posture in the region, stand with Israel militarily in the region, and also make sure the Islamic Republic knows it has much more to lose by going down the weaponization route than to gain.
I know what I'm about to ask you is a very vague, very broad question, but in 2016, Donald Trump wins the White House. In 2020, Donald Trump loses. In 2024, Donald Trump wins again. So we will be seeing a second Trump term. What is this signaling, this back and forth, signaling to the rest of the world?
Well, there are stories of political comebacks in U.S. politics. You know, President Richard Nixon, despite not being president before he entered office in 1968, did have a major political comeback given his the gyrations in his political career. Grover Cleveland, for example, did have a political comeback, much like Donald Trump, leaving and coming back into the White House. You've had people occupy the position of president in American history and then go on to hold other political office, like John Quincy Adams, for example. So there is a precedent for having some gyration and some oscillation at the top here. I think the world knows America is a very robust, very vibrant democracy. Yes, we've got a couple of issues to work out, but the openness of that system and the receptivity to the changes in the mood on the street in the long run does not mean at all that democracy is in decline in America. It means that it is very much a process and a work in progress.
And historically, as administrations change, especially amongst party from Democrat to Republican, does that change our relationships with our allies? And is that change tremendous? What does that look like?
That is where the concern indeed lies. Given the hyperpolarization in America on some national security issues, seeing some things as black or white, hawkish or dovish, Republican-led or Democrat-led, that is where, unfortunately, the polarization in our politics is leading to our adversaries being able to exploit us, and even sometimes our allies being able to exploit us. And so here, it's not about the comeback story of one candidate. It's about the gyrations in our politics, and it's about the polarization in our society and the othering. And unfortunately, the not letting, unfortunately, the fact that that domestic politics has not stopped at water's edge, that has allowed some of our adversaries to be able to exploit this. So the uncertainty, the unpredictability, those are not things I chalk up to a political candidate or to a certain party. Those are things that I think actually have to do with us individually as Americans, and will take time culturally and socially to repair with us as Americans if we're going to get this right and to prevent both adversaries and allies from being able to exploit this.
From that perspective, Donald Trump won this week. The transition will begin soon. What exactly are you looking out for from around the world between now and January 20th once he's inaugurated?
Well, people have loved to play, at least in term one Trump, Kremlinology, looking who's up, who's down, who's had lunch with the president, who's the president tweeting about, to figure out who would carry influence with the president that week or that month or that quarter even. I think this is a bit too much. All of this, even in term one, was art, not science. I think it's critical as we look at who is staffing the transition teams to take that into account, but to check that and push back and look at, well, what is the president-elect saying? What has he said in the past? What have the changes been on those issues? And look at fundamentally the views, values, and interests of the most important person, and then take that into effect when trying to figure out what is America going to look like at home and abroad starting in 2025.
Well, there's certainly a lot to look for. And Ben Talblue, I appreciate you coming on. And as we continue down this road, I hope you come back on and join me and break it down again. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.